Hello, everybody. A warm welcome to all of you to the first online workshop on scientific writing and research ethics by DBT Wellcome Trust India Alliance with our knowledge and training partners, Editage. My name is Sara Iqbal. I am the lead communications and public engagement at India Alliance. I really hope that all of you are doing very well and taking good care of yourselves and your near and dear ones. Before I move forward, I just want to give you a very quick introduction to the organization that I represent. India Alliance is a charitable trust registered in India that funds research in health and biomedical sciences. It is funded by the Department of Biotechnology, Government of India, and Wellcome Trust UK. Apart from funding research, we also have various programs that promote national and international research collaborations, professional skill workshops like these, and also programs on strengthening research ecosystems and promoting science education and public awareness and engagement with science in India. You can find all this information on our website, so I will not spend too much time on this. And as perhaps some of you already know, India Alliance regularly conducts one-day science communication workshops that we like to call SciComm 101 at different institutions around the country. And the goal of these workshops really is to sensitize young researchers about the importance of ethics in research and also the importance of written and oral communication skills in not just advancing their research careers, but in also building public's trust and support for science by making their research more accessible. So you may be doing some fantastic and cutting edge research, but if you're unable to effectively communicate your work, what good is it really? After all, the field of science can only move forward if scientific knowledge is shared in an effective and timely manner. And similarly, what good is your research and all the papers that you publish if you do not follow the ethical principles of research? So with that in mind, we've brought to you these workshops. And it's also important to remember that these professional skills that you learn during your PhD, during your research training, will really come in handy in any career that you choose to pursue later. And it's also important to remember that these workshops, no matter how many you attend, will not make you an expert in scientific communication. You would need to put into practice all that you learn at these workshops, any other workshop that you plan to attend. So, well, under these current circumstances, when the standard avenues for doing these physical workshops was unavailable due to the restrictions that have been put in place due to the pandemic, we felt these virtual workshops are the next best option for us. And why should learning really stop? So even though this medium may not be ideal, may be restrictive to some extent, please do try to make the most out of today's workshop. Ask questions, share your views, and most importantly, attend the full workshop to really benefit from all that the trainers and our speakers today have to share with you on research ethics and scientific communication. So before I move forward, I just would like to quickly introduce you to some of the names that you might see popping up during this workshop. These are my colleagues, Yukti Arora, Hina Lateef Banyakar, and also from Editage we have Neha Vyas. And with that, I would like to invite my colleague Yukti Arora, who along with me will be your host and host for today's workshop. So over to you.
Thanks, Sara. So hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. A few housekeeping matters before we get started. So the webinar is being recorded. If any of your friends miss out on today's session, they will always be given the link and they can follow the webinar through the recording. Recording will be available through India Alliance YouTube channel. If you have a question, please make sure that your statement starts with question in cap. And if you have a comment, please start it with comment. This will help the moderators sort out the questions and comments. In case the webinar ends abruptly due to any technical glitch, please join back using the same link that you just joined. And lastly, the e-certificate will be provided in the end to those who will attend the entire workshop and will submit the post-webinar feedback form. So before we start, I'll quickly let you through go through the agenda of today's workshop. So the first session of the workshop is on the basics of scientific writing and structuring your manuscript to impress journal editor. This will be a 50 minutes long session, including 10 minutes of question and answers. We will then take a 10 minutes short break and will join back for the second session on the ethics in research and communication. This session will be 1 hour long and will be followed by question and answers round. We would request you to make the most of this session, and let's make it interactive as much as possible by asking questions, and then we'll finally conclude the workshop. So the first session, we are actually delighted to talk about our trainers. These are the two trainers who will be taking the two sessions. The first session is on the basics of scientific writing and structuring your manuscript to impress journal editors. The session will be taken by Mr. Yatendra Joshi. He is the academic publication trainer at Editage with more than 30 years of experience as an editor. He is the only Indian certified by the Board of Editors in the Life Sciences USA as the master editor. This will be a 50 minutes long session, like I mentioned, which includes 10 minutes of Q&A. The second session, which is on the ethics of research and communications, will be taken by Dr. Sunaina Singh. Sunaina is a freelance academic editor and consultant academic trainer at Editage. Sunaina will tell us about the best practices of how do we respond to the editors and reviewers of a journal, and then we'll subsequently talk about the research ethics. So before wasting any time, let's start with the first session, and let's welcome Mr. Yatendra Joshi. Over to you, sir.
And it is necessary that I give you your time's worth. So I'll start by making two promises. One, if you put into practice what I'm going to share with you in this an hour's talk, the chances, you will reduce the chances that your paper is rejected without review. It does happen. Many papers are rejected without review because they don't follow certain norms, what is expected of research papers. So that's my first promise, that you will increase the chances that your paper gets sent to the reviewers. Now, what the reviewers do, well, it's presumptuous of me to talk about that, because that reviewers are going to assess your scientific content, the substance, not so much presentation or style. My second promise is, let's say that reviewers recommend your paper. They ask you first to make some changes, but after you make the changes, the editor decides to accept your paper. In that case, once your paper is accepted, and there could be several other papers that are also waiting in the queue, they all have been accepted by reviewers, but your paper will move along the assembly line faster than other papers, simply because you have prepared it the way you want it, or the way the journals want it. So these are the two promises that I make. So we'll start with choosing a journal. How do you choose a journal? Because the choice is so wide. At the same time, and later on, we'll see what you should avoid. That is, there are some category of journals you should not send your papers to, the so-called predatory journals. But right now, we'll focus on how do you select the right journal. Now, here are some tips. For instance, you use the keywords that you have used in your manuscript, run a Google Scholar search, and see what journals feature in the results that you get. So that is one possibility, that those journals will offer a good fit. The second clue is you take a look at the references that you have appended to your research paper. So you have cited sources, and check which journals feature in your list of references. And again, you will get a clue, because if you, the journal to which you intend to submit your paper, chances are that it will feature in the list of references that you have. In fact, it's a slight warning sign, I would say, that if the journal to which you intend to submit your paper does not feature even once in your list of references, I think there's something amiss. Then there are also some tools. How do you choose a journal? Is essentially the tools, what they do is you paste the title of your paper and the abstract of your paper in the space that is provided. And then the journals, the website returns with a list of possible journals. For instance, there's a Springer journal selector. You have the URL, you can try it at some point. So essentially what you do is you paste the title of your paper and either the text or the abstract of your text and click suggest journals. And it will suggest a match based on some algorithm that the publishers have developed. The only thing, of course, is it will come up with only those journals that are published by Springer. Elsevier has something similar, and if you are particular that your journal should be amongst the Web of Science journals, then you have another device. It's called Manuscript Matcher. Again, it works the same way. You paste the title and the abstract. The only assurance here is all the journals that it recommends will be amongst the Web of Science journals. So they will have legitimate impact factor and so on. So these are some tools that you could use. Now let's see why papers are rejected. These are things that you should avoid. Now what I've highlighted in red are something that you can address in this talk. I can't talk about study design or the significance of your research, but remember that these 3 points, poorly organized manuscript, errors of spelling, grammar, punctuation, and so on, and ignoring journal's instructions. The journal editors will certainly mind it if you don't follow the instructions to journals. Now, authors often do that. Authors often ignore instructions to journals, not because they want to ignore them, but because sometimes they're couched in language that doesn't reveal the importance of those, or it doesn't say why these instructions should be adhered to. So let's take that into account. Now your paper, once it is submitted, there's a quick preliminary screening. Now this preliminary screening is to decide whether your paper is worth being sent to reviewers in the first place, because reviewers' time is precious and journals won't like to waste that. So there's a quick screening. The quick screening is done by people who are not necessarily experts in your particular topic or your particular field. They may have broad interest or broad understanding, but at this stage, they are only interested in running a quick check just to decide whether it should be sent to the reviewers, who will then, of course, judge the paper for its substance. And in that, again, I've highlighted one point: appropriately formatted. The paper that you submit to the journal has to be appropriately formatted. I'll come back to that later, what exactly you mean by appropriate. And remember that getting a paper published is a competitive business. Just as you want to get your paper published in a high impact factor journal, so do hundreds of others. So you must put your best foot forward. You must play to the game that's how it's played. So as you see, one of these journals, it is quite candid. It says upfront that we will not process manuscripts that don't meet these standards. Now, mind you, this has nothing to do with the substance of your research. But before the substance of your research can be assessed, can be evaluated, it must be presented to certain standards. So these are the things that you really need to be extra careful, just as when you attend an interview. So you will polish your shoes, you will wear neatly pressed clothes. Now you will say that, well, I mean, I should be selected based on my competency for the job. But nevertheless, you do pay attention to these factors, right? Exactly the same way, no matter how groundbreaking your research is, you must observe these niceties, you could say that. So here the idea is that, and your paper will be accompanied by a cover letter. Now the best hook you can use in your cover letter is you mention some papers that are already published by your target journal and say how your work links to those articles published by the journal to which you are submitting your paper. This instantly will get editors interested, because if they can see that there is a link, they know that this paper is also likely to be of interest to their readers. So that's one thing you should mention in your cover letter. There are other things, for instance, first paragraphs of introduction, discussion. Why? Because at preliminary screening, no one's going to read your paper in full. They will simply scan these areas, and if you find that, and if they find that these areas even contain obvious areas of spelling, grammar, and punctuation, and it shows that journal style has not been adhered to, then your paper is out. So don't do that. And don't lose heart. If the first journal to which you submit your paper doesn't accept it, that's fine. You can always submit to another journal. In fact, if your paper has been reviewed and then you have revised it in light of the reviewer's comments, then you are offering the second journal a better product than you offered to the first journal. So as you can see these statistics, don't be disheartened if your paper is rejected. Now let us take all the parts of a paper in sequence. So there is the title of the paper, the abstract, introduction, methods. So we'll deal with each of these. So title of the paper. Now, just as when you look at a new issue of a journal which you normally use, you will quickly scan the list of contents. And only those, so you are at that stage, you are only reading the titles of the papers. And only if the title looks relevant to you, only then you are going to click or open the page at that particular title. So the same thing is going to happen to your paper, that your title must be accurately indicative of the contents. One tip, don't start your title with a study of or experiment on, no. Because typically research papers are studies, they are results of investigation. So you don't have to start the title of your paper with such terms. Now see the last bullet point here, check capitalization, alignment. Now these you would see that, these are totally trivial. What does it have to do with the substance of your paper? But see, for instance, I've picked at random 4 journals, and this is how they display the titles of their papers. Now note, for instance, the first example, it is like a sentence. So only some words are capitalized. This one, what we call the title case. So every significant word starts with a capital letter. The last example, everything is in capital letters. Now there is no right or wrong about this. What is important is if the target journal, the journal to which you are submitting your paper, chooses to print the titles in entirely capital letters, then that is what you must do. If the journal uses bold, so be it, you use bold for printing the titles. So pay attention to these. If nothing else, they will send signals to the journal's editor that you have taken care to observe their journal's practices and you are conforming to that. Now, then you have to also supply keywords. This is again, very many authors don't give enough attention to choosing keywords. Now take, for instance, this is the title of the paper and these are the keywords. Now traditional medicine, why use it as a keyword? Because it is already there in the title. Review, why use it as a keyword? Because it's already there in the title. So ideally what you need to do is to choose as keywords terms that don't find a place in the title, because the keywords from title are going to be picked up automatically. So now take, for instance, this is a good example, except this one, which is already there in the title. All these are useful keywords. They are very specific and they are not there in the title. So choose such keywords. Don't choose keywords that are too broad. Now, typically a research paper is organized in this way, what we call the IMRAD structure. I for introduction, M for methods, R for results, D for discussion. So we'll take a look at that, and we'll also look at the abstract. So when you start thinking of writing a research paper, I would say don't tell yourself that you are going to write a research paper, because that's too abstract a description of what you really have to do. What I suggest is you say to yourself that I'm going to write an account of my research structured as follows. Now, these figures, of course, they are not cast in stone, but this will give you a rough idea of what a typical research paper looks like. And although this is the sequence, you don't have to follow that sequence when you start writing. For instance, you might find methods and results sections are easiest to write because you are simply describing what you did and what you found. In fact, I would say that you should start writing the methods section even before your results are in. You don't have to wait for entire research to be completed before you start writing your research paper. In fact, you will find it easier to write the method section because all the details will be there fresh in your mind. So do that. So this is a broad structure of a typical research paper. Now we talked about title, we have abstract. Now let's say that readers have skimmed the contents of the issue in which your paper has been published, and they looked at your title, they thought that it's relevant. So then they come to the abstract of your paper. Now the purpose of the abstract is to let them decide whether they should read the paper in full. So they have already been persuaded by the title, but they want to do something more. They want to see whether the abstract, after reading the abstract, whether they would still want to read your paper. So these are the things that you need to keep in mind. Typically, abstracts have very rigid word limits, typically around 250 words. So for instance, background information is not required in the abstract. Likewise, most important, do not repeat information that your title is already provided. The papers that I edit, very often I see this, that the authors repeat in the abstract the information that readers could have easily gathered by reading the title. So don't repeat this information. Typically, an abstract is just one continuous paragraph, but increasingly some journals require structured abstracts. So it has specific headings. So that will depend on the journal that you have chosen. The abstract, as I said, titles and abstract go together. This is an extreme example of this. You see, this is the longest title, and the abstract is just 2 words. So the title posed a question, and the abstract answered it. So title and abstract work together. Now let us follow the IMRAD structure. Now each of these 4 sections, I, M, R, and D, introduction, methods, results, and discussion, think of it as an answer to a question. So introduction answers the question, why? Why did you choose this topic? Why is it important? What have others done so far to solve it? Now you may have in your PhD thesis or your master's dissertation, there is a chapter review of literature. But in research papers, there is no such heading, review of literature. That is part of the introduction. In the introduction, you are supposed to cite a few papers, what others have done to attack the problem that you are attacking, and how your paper differs from those. In general, the introduction should follow what we call a funnel-like structure, that we should open with a broad statement about the topic, explains its importance, but you should always end your introduction with very specific objectives or very specific questions that are answered in your research paper. So that is why introduction structure is like a funnel. It begins with something broad and ends with exactly what you are going to do in your paper. So that's the introduction. It answers the question, why? Materials and methods answers a different question, how? So how did you do whatever that you did? Now here you are writing for your peers. So assume that they are technically as knowledgeable or as competent as you are. You don't have to describe all the methods in great detail. Any standard method that you follow, just a reference should be enough. But these are the things that are important, depending on the subject. Now yours, I gather that mostly this audience is a biomedical field. So season, for instance, unless we are talking about some ailments that are season specific, whatever. Also, don't forget to describe the control group, the results that you obtained. How are you going to compare? How do you find that they are worthwhile? Likewise, you must mention sample size, statistical design, because reviewers do look at these, and they should be convinced that you have followed the valid protocols. In terms of writing, just write in the past tense, because you are describing what you did. So some things that have already happened. So use the simple past tense, and that is fine. The next section is results. And that answers another question, namely what. So what did you find? So research section is typically, you will have tables, you may have charts, you will give quantitative information. So what you need to do, again, let's say you have used a table, then don't put all the information that you have put in the table also in text. Don't paraphrase the entire table. You can just give a highlight of 1 or 2 key values and then describe the results. Again, write in the past tense, because you are talking about what you have already found. Follow standards in expressing units, because this is something that I often find the papers that I edit, these authors overlook that. So what I want to do is I want to digress it a bit, a short digression on certain things that you must follow when you are using SI units. Let's take a look at these. For instance, a quantitative expression typically has a value, there's a space, and there's a unit. The unit itself consists of a prefix and a symbol. So megawatt, for instance, M is the prefix, W is the symbol. Kilowatt, K is the prefix, W is the symbol. But remember that all dividers, that is, they divide the value of the unit and multiply up to 1000. They are in lowercase. So just remember, K in kilo is never a capital letter. Now, typically, yes, you require a space between the quantity and the unit. But there are some expressions that don't require this space. In fact, you must not use this space. Percent sign, always set it close to the number. Currency symbols, always set close to the number. Geographic coordinates, degrees, minutes, seconds, they all must be close to each other. And whenever you express geographic coordinates, always you give the north or south dimension first, the latitude first, and then the longitude, always. Then remember that these are symbols, they are not abbreviations. What is the difference? For instance, abbreviations may have plural form, but symbols have no plural forms. The singular and plural are identical. So you don't ever put S when you use KMS, kilometers. No, it is just KM. Even if it's 2, it is just KM. And it is not an abbreviation. You may abbreviate the word inch to IN, and then you'll put a dot after IN because it's an abbreviation. But KM is not an abbreviation. It's a symbol, and it does not take a dot. If you're spelling out the unit in full, you are not using the symbol, then it has to be lowercase. Now the correct characters, very often I find the simple character, the degree symbol. The degree symbol, there is a correct degree symbol, and you don't get a degree symbol by typing the letter 0 typing the number 0 and making it a superscript, or typing the letter O and making it a superscript. You don't get a multiplication sign by typing the letter X. You don't get a minus sign by using the hyphen. They are different. So see here, now this is the letter X, but what was meant was a multiplication. So you have to use the clear multiplication sign. Percent sign has to be close and it has to be repeated. In a range of percentage, you require percent twice. Percent here and percent there. So where do you get these special characters? If you're using Windows, this is the simplest way. You can go to Accessories, System Tools, Character Map. Depending on the font that you have chosen, you will see which character you will get. You can see a larger version here. And you can see also at the bottom right and bottom left. Now this is another way of getting that character. You press the Alt key, keep it pressed, and type 181 from the numerical keypad. If you are using a laptop, it doesn't have a separate numerical keypad. Then you type this B5, and then immediately after that you type Alt X. You will get this character. Or simply select, copy, and paste. But remember that you must use these characters. So back to, that was a short digression on units, but mind these details. So discussion. Now that's a difficult section to write because the answers, you have to answer this question, so what? Okay, you have told us why you did something, you told us how you did it, you told us what you have found, but what are the implications? That is something that you need to take into account. And I remember that I said that your introduction should end with specific objectives, with specific questions that are answered in your paper. So your discussion should link back to the introduction. The promise that you made in the introduction, you must make good that promise in the discussion section. In terms of tenses, of course, here you will use a variety of tenses. For instance, what you are talking about that is generally true, a broad statement, then you will use the present tense. If you are discussing a specific result obtained by a particular researcher, you will use the past tense. If you are talking about what is possible in future lines of work, you may use the future tense. So it's a mix of tenses. Now, what is the section that comes after the discussion? References. So we'll spend a little time discussing that. There are two basic styles. So citation is a mention of a source of information within the body of the paper, and a reference is a matching details of the source. So there are two common systems: citation by numbers, that is sometimes referred to as the Vancouver system; citation by names of authors and year of publication, that's called the Harvard system. So sometimes the instruction to journals, instruction to authors say that we follow Vancouver system. Do you know what the journal means by that? So you will think that Vancouver system is simple, just numbers. Not quite. How will you print those numbers? Will you print them normally, what we call inline, or will you make superscripts? Will you enclose them in brackets? If so, what brackets? Round brackets, square brackets? Where will you place these numbers? At the end of a sentence, you will place the number and then you will put a full stop, or you will put a full stop and then you give the number. There is no standard method. Different journals follow different details of Vancouver system. So pay attention to your target journal and follow that. The Harvard system, as I said, it has the name of author and the year of publication. That's the Harvard system. The details, again, these things can be different. Now, how many names before et al? Et al is and others. Now, some journals say that if there are 3 or more authors, use et al. Some journals will say there are 6 or more authors, use et al. There is no agreement on journals. Now, remember that et al is always et is a word in itself. It is never followed by a dot. Et means and. Al is followed by a dot. Now, some journals will use a comma between the names of authors and the area of publication. Some journals will only use a space. What if there are multiple citations? How will you arrange them? So in this case, they are arranged alphabetically, literally from A to Z, as you could see here. Whereas some journals arrange it chronologically. So 8 and then 2009, 2013, 2014. There's no one right or wrong method of this. It's just the journal style. So observe what the journal does, what your target journal does, and follow that. So that's citations. Now, you remember, you have to prepare your paper the way the journal wants it. So trivial details. So some journals will abbreviate the word figure to just FIG and dot. Some journals will spell it out in full, FIGURE. Some journals will use numbered headings, one introduction, two materials and methods. Some journals won't use it. And don't use words automatic numbering for these numbers. Do it manually. At the same time, it's not necessary that your paper looks exactly the way a published paper looks. For instance, many journals follow 2 or 3 columns, but your file should be only a single column. You don't have to guess which typeface the journal is using and use that. No, it doesn't matter. Any of these typefaces are good. Now, many journals follow what we call full justification, but the file that you submit, no, it should always have only left justification. So these are some of the things that you need to keep in mind. For instance, this journal uses numbered headings. So 2 materials and methods, subheading under that 2.1. Even here, such a trivial detail that there is a dot after this 2. Some journals use numbered headings with the dots. Some journals use numbered headings without the dot. Again, do what your journal does. Your target journal, follow that. There are some journals, as you can see, don't use numbered headings. So they simply use typographic distinction, bold, italics, whatever. See, this journal, for instance, abbreviates the word figure to just FIG. So FIG dot. Whereas this journal spells it out in full, FIGURE, figure 1. Again, there's no right or wrong. Just observe what your target journal does and follow that. Journals can be incredibly picky about the instruction that they give. Now simply see this detailed instruction about writing figure captions. This is in bold, no punctuation after the number, no punctuation at the end of the caption. Some journals will put a colon, some journals put a full stop after caption, whatever. Again, observe what the journals do and follow that. Now, earlier I mentioned to you that just as you would be careful in choosing the right journal for your paper, you should also avoid certain journals. And these are increasingly what we call predatory journals. Because you are under so much pressure to publish a whole, in marketplace, there are people who are agencies who want to capitalize on that pressure. So avoid these journals. So these are some telltale marks of a suspicious journal. For instance, they will always talk about the fee. They will tell you that we will publish your paper very fast. They will be coy about revealing their exact location. They may claim impact factors, but you need to cross-check. I'll come to that in a minute. And these journals are typically multidisciplinary. Whatever your paper, they will publish it. And remember, UGC in India has now taken a tough stance about academics publishing papers in these predatory journals. So both you and the institution that you represent can be taken to task for publishing. And not only you will not get any credit for that, but you may even be penalized. Plagiarism is also an issue. I would say, first of all, don't lift whole blocks from one paper which is already published and paste in your paper. Don't use it verbatim. If you do it, always put it in quotation mark. For instance, you may be critical about a particular definition and you want to cite that definition exactly. So in that case, use quotation marks and always put a citation and reference. Do not cite something that you have not read. Avoid secondary citations. Now, this is a simple device that you could use just to avoid identical words. So this is simply a phrase bank. So what you do is substitute, one phrasing from another. So it's not an identical wording. So this will at times help you to escape this charge of plagiarization. The author may have said resulting from, you could say caused by, whatever. Citation, there are some good sources. There is an online source. How do you handle these different methods of citation? So what I'm going to do is quickly some sources that we have. I'll run through them. For instance, Editage is a good source of information on, all kinds of information on different aspects of writing a paper. So that's a good, rich website. Different publishers also have many major publishers give a lot of attention to educating their authors. So you can always look up the websites of these publishers. You'll find a lot of information on how to prepare a paper. So Taylor and Francis, Springer, Elsevier has a research academy. So all these are good sources. After all, I cannot cover everything in 1 hour. So, but you will find these sources useful. There are good books, good websites. For instance, I talked to you about SI units. Now, this is the official SI unit handbook. You can download it free of charge from the website. There are good books. Now, this has a very systematic plan. As the title says, how to write your article in 12 weeks. So it presents you with a systematic plan, what you should do in the first week, what you should do in the second week. If you follow that, at the end of 12 weeks, you will have a paper ready for submission. This is a good recent guide. Don't go by the subtitle, Engineers and Physical Scientists. I don't know why the authors chose this, because the information it contains is valid also for biomedical. It is not restricted to engineers and physical scientists. Especially with language, there are many books. Again, this is a good source. It deals with typically the errors that we make because our first language is something other than English. For biomedical papers, especially, this is Tim Albert's is a good book to follow on this. And again, you will see that your main job is research, but unless you publish it, nobody will believe you. For your promotions, for grants, for traveling abroad, for fellowships, you require to publish, and you publish in good journals. So this is a practical book on how do you tackle this business of writing. So what I've done towards the end is these are the books, and I've also given the bibliographic details of these books. So you or your library wants to get hold of these, there are the details, the authors here, whatever. And thank you for listening. If you have any questions, any specific questions, I'll be happy to answer them. How select, okay. There's an interesting question. Does this make good title for a review paper? Well, but it doesn't say that it's a review. That's the only comment I can give you. Any other question you have? How students can select journal from UGCs that are not FT on the pocket? Okay, that's a good question. Now, first of all, be aware that UGC list is being revised. In fact, in one stroke, they removed something like 600 journals from their list. Now, there are, in fact, separate funding may be available. You can check your institute, because after when you publish a paper in a good journal, it is also a credit to your institute. So very often the institute may be willing to fork in the money that you pay. Also remember this, that most legitimate journals will raise the question of payment only after they have decided to accept your paper. And even there you have a choice that if you want your paper to be open access, then you may be charged a fee. Many journals will not charge a fee if your paper doesn't have to be open access. So look at these, and then there is a plan S and so on. So there are other options. We'll look at some of those options. Any other questions? I request the presenter show the link for Phrase Bank. Okay, that's, in fact, I could show you a link, but simple, just type in Google Phrase Bank Manchester University. You will get the link. Figure redraw permission. Yes, if you take a figure and reproduce it without any modification, then first of all, of course, you must mention the source of the figure, but many journals will insist that you obtain prior permission of the authors or of the journal, because typically most journals will have the copyright. So you will need to request the journal's publishers request to use a specific figure from a published paper. Yes, you do require permission. Can you show us how Vancouver system is followed? Well, Vancouver system, you will notice it that instead of, whenever there is a citation, a source is indicated in the body of the paper. If you see a number, now the number may be a superscript number, it may be inline, it may be enclosed in brackets. In fact, most biomedical journals follow Vancouver system. So for want of time, I could not include enough examples, but most biomedical journals in fact follow Vancouver system. So any of these journals, even Nature follows numbering, so you can take a recent issue and look at that. Science again does the same thing, both follow Vancouver system. Should et al. Be in italic? See, this is what I was getting at, that some journals will specifically mention in their instruction to authors whether et al. Should be in Roman, that is not italics, or it should be in italics. Failing that, observe any recent issue of the journal and see how the journal treats this et al. Some journals use italics, some journals don't use italics. So depends on your target journal. Follow that. Shravani, that is my answer to your question. Any more questions? Well, that's about it.
If you can suggest free online tools for grammar check and plagiarism.
That do not use a grammar checker. My experience is it shows you too many false positives. So I would say that best use the services of an editor or use somebody who is proficient in English. Grammar checker will only slow you down. I would say that they add no value. I mean, this is my personal opinion. Now, plagiarization, see, the question is that although these software claim that they are plagiarism checking or plagiarism detecting software, they are not. Actually, what they are similarity checkers. So they only look for similarities. Now, how do you define a similarity? For instance, there are many sentences, identical sentences that can occur in many papers. For instance, you use a phrase, it was observed that, it was observed that, 4 words. Now, this sequence of 4 words can occur in hundreds of papers, thousands of papers. That doesn't make it a plagiarism. So then the question is, how many words must appear how many words should be there in identical sequence? Where do you draw the cutoff? So I would say 7 or 8 words in sequence makes it very unlikely that you will find a match. So I would say that provided you have not done cut and paste, you have used your own words, you have used your own phrases, you don't have to worry about plagiarism checkers. Any other questions?
Idea to select the journal before we start writing the manuscript.
Sorry, would you repeat that, please?
A better idea to finalize the journal before we start drafting the manuscript.
Yes, I would agree with that totally. That it is much better practice to decide on which journal you want to submit your paper to and then start crafting your manuscript. However, write the method section, you don't really have to wait for that. Method section, ideally you should be writing as you go along. But before you start writing the introduction or discussion, I would say yes, it makes sense to have a specific journal in mind before you start writing your research paper. More questions?
Somebody is asking how to communicate with editors if the comment by peer review is completely out of the scope of the paper.
Okay. Now, see, when you are responding to peer review, in fact, that's a whole topic in itself, that how do you prepare a response to the reviewer's letter. But I'll mention just 2 things. After all, the editors have sought comments from reviewers, and typically most journals will invite comments from 2 or 3 or 4 reviewers. Now, it's not necessary that all the reviewers will agree. It is also not necessary that you have to agree to everything what the reviewers are saying. What the journal editors are interested, what they look for is whether you have addressed every concern that the reviewer has made. So if you don't agree with a certain comment made by the reviewer, you are at a full liberty. You could say that you simply disagree. Of course, you need to be polite about it, but then you justify, either citing what you wrote originally or any other reference that you have quoted, and justify why this particular suggestion by the reviewer, you are not accepting it. Don't be under the impression that everything what the reviewers say, you must say yes. Not necessarily. The journal editor, if the journal editor is convinced that you have addressed every concern expressed by the reviewers adequately, then you should be fine. Structure abstracts. Well, I will take that question. Now, increasingly, some journals, now traditionally, abstract is just one paragraph, one continuous paragraph, no headings, no citations, no figures, nothing. But increasingly, as you know, our attention span comes down, journals are increasingly insisting on structured abstract. So what a structured abstract does is it's a miniature version of the paper, in the sense the same main headings that are used, the IMRAT headings, introduction, method, Caesar, discussion, they are reproduced in the abstract. So in the abstract, each of this section has 2 or 3 lines, and it may have additional headings like objectives and so on. So that is what is called a structured abstracts. So structured abstract is simply an abstract which has some headings. How to face the issue when some Scopus index journal is removed at a certain point. I'm sorry, I really can't answer this, because these are things that are well beyond, you know, your control or my control. So long as you are, your bosses are happy with the choice of your journal, that shouldn't be too much of a problem. But I can't really answer this question. I'm sorry.
How
throw light on systematic review. Well, there is a whole, sorry.
Sorry. So how can one cross-check the journal's impact factor?
Okay. Now simply type this in Google, master journal list and Clarivate Analytics. Because impact factor now is given by an agency called Clarivate Analytics. So if you go to Clarivate Analytics website, you will find that there is a search box. So you can type the title of a journal and the website will tell you whether it has a legitimate impact factor or not. That is the only way to verify it. And it's a good question. You must do that because there are many journals that claim to have an impact factor. But if you do a search, you will find that this journal is not listed in Clarivate Analytics list at all. And you don't have to pay for searching this. It's there's no charge. So you can verify whether the journal that claims a certain impact factor, whether it in fact is indexed by Web of Science. So you could do that.
Is asking that sometimes results and discussions are two separate sections and sometimes they are merged together. Which of the two styles is more effective and recommended?
Well, again, I would say that this is the journal's prerogative. There are some journals that merge this into one section and the heading will be results and discussion. There are some journals that treat this as separately. But this is something that over which we really have no choice. If you have a choice, I would say that the logic behind keeping results and discussion separately is that in results, you are only giving what you found. Your comments, your implications are in a separate section. See, just like in a newspaper stories are expected to report facts, but the editorials are supposed to comment on those facts. So in the same way, in the results section, you only report what you found. And what is the implication of these results that you discuss in discussion section. Another advantage in keeping these two separate is that when people are preparing extensive reviews, they will only focus on your results because they will do their own assessment of the implications of these results. So for this meta-analysis or systematic review, as somebody has already asked, it makes more sense to have results section, separate section than discussion. But if your target journal merges them into one, then you have no choice. That is what you need to do.
For the citation software, or should it be done manually?
Sorry, what should be done manually?
The citation, do you recommend some citation softwares or should it be done manually?
Well, actually, I would say that if you are not writing reviews, and that you are not writing reviews as your main course of work, and your reference list is limited to, let's say, 25, 30 references, I see no particular advantage in using a reference manager or EndNote or any of this. Then there are two others. I will qualify this answer by a few other points. For instance, now both reference manager and EndNote, these are expensive software packages. But there are others like Zotero or Mendeley that will help you. In fact, I would say if you are a little bit proficient in using Word, Microsoft Word itself offers a simple way of doing this. There is something called mail merge. Now, mail merge is essentially was meant when you want to send the same letter with identical body, but to different persons. So what you do is you create a separate database, which will only have the names of people and their address and so on. And there's another, there's the body of the letter. And mail merge then prints a series of letters in which the address's name is replaced with each printout. Now, this feature can also be used for formatting your references. So what you do is you choose a field. Now, when you take a typical reference, what does it have? It will have the names of authors. It will have the year of publication. It will have the title of the paper. It will have the title of the journal. It will have volume number and so on. So you treat each this as a separate field. So in that case, you can do this easier. But I would say if you simply focus on how a particular journal formats its references, you look at the sequence, the punctuation, and the typography, then you should be able to handle it on your own. I don't see any need for a separate package.
If you have an idea, if you get an idea which is derived from a YouTube talk, how should one cite that?
If you have derived an idea using
A YouTube link or a YouTube video, how do you cite that?
Oh, that's fine. In fact, most of these sources that I mentioned, cite them online or do books on citations, or even just journals instruction to authors. They will typically illustrate how you would give a reference to different kinds of sources. For instance, there will be an exemplar or a example of a paper in a journal, a chapter in a book, a whole book, and there will likewise there will be instructions on how do you give a reference to a website. So YouTube falls under that. That typically how do you give a reference to a website? The journal's instruction to authors will illustrate that. You can simply follow that.
Okay. So for someone who has no experience in scientific writing, could you suggest how should they start?
Okay, let me ask a counter question. That whether that person is a researcher, right, and trying to write a research paper, or that person wants to write about science in general for magazines or newspapers.
So from the subsequent question, it appears that the attendee is a PhD scholar and is pursuing research. So it's certainly about writing a research paper.
Okay, but one is, I assume that if the person who asked this question has a doctorate degree, probably it's increasingly a requirement that unless you submit or unless you publish at least 2 papers, you won't be given a degree. But forget that. I would say best thing is, depending on your field, now you should make it a practice that you must choose 2 or 3 core journals, the journals that are most relevant to your field of work. And you must make it a practice to skim through at least skim through every issue of that journal. Now, if you do this regularly and you read up some of the important papers and some of the recent papers as they are relevant to your field, you would get a pretty good idea how papers are written as well as structured. I would say reading is the best preparation for writing.
Yeah, that sounds good. So somebody asks, please elaborate a bit more on how to write a good cover letter.
Okay. One, I've already mentioned that best thing is if you can insert in your covering letter some link to some papers that have already been published in that journal in its recent issue, maybe a year or maximum 2 years. That is one. Second, you also need to justify, you need to mention why you are submitting your paper to that particular journal. If you can bring in some justification, then that again makes an impression on the editors. That is, they would like to think that you have chosen their particular journal to submit your paper. So that's the second thing you should mention. The third thing you should mention is what has prompted you to, what are the implications of this research. After all, you don't have to reproduce the abstract or any block of text from the text of your paper. But if you can convince the editors why this particular paper that you are offering, how it will be of interest to the journal's editors, journal's readers. See, after all, journals editors are there to serve the readers of those journals. So if you can convince the editors of those journals how the readers of those journals will benefit from your paper, that is again a good thing to mention in covering letter. But as I said, the best hook is a link to something that the journal has already published.
Okay. Mr. Joshi, can you also tell us the difference between a paid journal and a non-paid journal?
All right. Now, I mentioned in passing about these so-called predatory journals. Now, one identification for predatory journals is that upfront they will mention the amount that you have to pay, whereas most legitimate journals will not mention this upfront. Because as I said, only if your paper is finally accepted, only then you will have a choice that if you want to make it open access, then you will be required to pay. So any journal that emphasizes on its website early on or early on in the instruction, any journal that emphasizes the matter of payment, be suspicious, because that is likely to be a predatory journal. Likewise, don't submit your paper based on any invitation that you receive from a journal. Most legitimate journals will not invite you to submit a paper. Only when you have made substantial contribution to your field, you have a big name in your field, then you might be asked to write a review, and that is typically invited. But otherwise, no journal will send you an email and ask you, please submit your paper to our journal. In fact, if you get such an email, again, be wary of this. This is most likely a predatory journal.
Yeah, that's helpful. Mr. Joshi, while citing a paper, is it required to write the reference number multiple times inside a paper?
Well, let's say that you are following, obviously you are talking about numbers, so you are following Vancouver system. So let's say that you come across the first source, so you give number 1 to that, some particular journal article that you mention. Then you mention another source, so you give number 2, and so on. Now, in the discussion, there is occasion that what you have already assigned number 2, that source you want to mention it again. So in that case, the number does not change. It will still be number 2. So there will be a unique number for each source. And it will be repeated out of sequence when it is mentioned for the second or third time.
Okay. When writing a paper, do we have to use high verbal skills and use fancy words, or is it that using simple language gets the attention?
Simple language, hands down, no question.
Yeah.
Because after all, reviewers are interested in the substance of your paper. And in fact, if you try to deliberately use fancy language, that might in fact prejudice them. So use clear, simple language so that they can focus on what you have to offer by way of science. In fact, one interesting book I would recommend, or you can just Google for Helen Sword, S-W-O-R-D. Helen Sword has made an extensive study of writing styles in academic papers. And she has a good website. She has written a couple of books. You will certainly find that useful. And she discusses this topic in much greater detail, that whether fancy language really counts and so on. So Helen Sword's website will be a good source.
Yeah, that's helpful. Is it necessary to write a cover letter every time when most journals asking for online submissions only ask for structured title page?
Please, can you repeat your question?
Yeah, sure. Is it necessary to write a cover letter every time when most of the journals asking for the online submissions only ask for a structured title page?
No, in fact, this is something that will become clear to you as you are uploading your paper. Because some journals, that is journals that they want a cover letter, there will be a specific step in the uploading process where you upload your cover letter. If the uploading does not have such a step, then that means the journal doesn't want a covering letter. And yes, there are journals that they don't ask for covering letters. So it varies from journal to journal. And as you're uploading it, there'll be one item there, cover letter, for instance, and there you can upload that.
Okay. What is a feature review? Can you elaborate more on what a feature review is?
A feature review?
Yes.
No, I'm sorry, I'm foxed. I haven't come across this term, and I don't want to guess.
Okay.
Well, if you really want me to guess, featured review is possible. That is, if it's an invited review, and that is being given some sort of special treatment or highlight. But I really don't know. I don't know what exactly you mean by feature review, and I haven't come across this term.
Should the main results or the findings be highlighted in the abstract itself, or should we wait till the conclusion comes in the manuscript?
Oh, no. Your results must be included in the abstract. What I said was you don't have to set the background to your research in the abstract. But yes, results are in fact the most important thing. So you must mention the most significant results in the abstract. Yes, very much so.
Somebody asks why Indian journals are not as popular as the American journals.
Well, as a copy editor, I would say we simply don't want to take the trouble to make our journals of a higher standard. We are simply we lack that drive. I mean, that's my personal opinion, that we don't want to take the trouble to take our journal to heights.
Can you tell us a bit about choice of words and the tenses that should be used in a manuscript? What role do these words and the tenses play? And which are some of the words that we should avoid while drafting a scientific manuscript?
Well, words to avoid, I would say colloquial expressions, for instance. Then they are out of place in a research manuscript because it's a very formal form of communication. Likewise, contractions, like don't or can't. No, you are not expected to use contractions when you write for research paper. Slang expressions, again, no, research paper is not a place to use slang expressions or colloquial expressions. It should be a formal one. As to tenses, as I mentioned in my presentation, there are some broad conventions that typically when you are writing your method section, you use the simple past because you are simply writing what you did. So everything has already happened. So use the past tense in writing the method section. The same thing applies to result section, that most of the time you are simply reporting what you found. So you will be using the past tense. Apart from that, two other things you need to keep in mind is that if what you are talking about is a general truth and something that you find or you accept as a truth, you are in support of the paper's findings, then again you use the present tense. Whereas if you are talking about a specific researcher and what he or she found, then you use the past tense. And as I mentioned in the discussion section, you will also have occasion to use the future tense. So broadly, I would say that introduction uses present tense and past tense. Materials and methods and results almost exclusively use the past tense, and discussion section will probably use all three. If that was of some help.
Sir, are there other criteria that we
No
use
questions.
to select a journal?
How do you select a journal?
Yeah, other criteria like apart from the impact factors, what should be the other criteria to select a journal?
Oh, okay. As a general tip, I would say that other things being equal, choose those journals that are published more frequently. So I would say prefer journals that are published every week or every 2 weeks or every month over journals that are published every quarter or every 6 months. For the simple reason that journals that are published more frequently, their systems are more streamlined, their systems are more robust. Whereas journals that are published only say once a quarter or once in 6 months are little laid back. So chances of delay is much more in these journals. I mean, that is one factor. The other crucial question you will need to address is whether to choose a multidisciplinary journal or a specialty journal. Now, depends on who are you trying to reach. If your paper has a substance that can be, the matter of your paper can be of interest to, or it will find applications in a variety of fields, then I would say it is better to choose a multidisciplinary journal because the impact will be much more. People from different disciplines are going to look at that journal. Whereas if your research is fairly specific, it's a niche research, then I would say a specialty journal will stand you in better stead. And that way, in terms of your profile, you will also make a mark when you publish repeatedly in a specialist journal rather than in multidisciplinary journals. So that is something you need to keep in mind. Apart from, as I said, impact factor, apart from frequency, and of course, make sure that you are not submitting or giving your contribution to a likely predatory journal. So avoid those.
As we are already talking about the impact factors, this seems to be participants' favorite question today. Can you deconstruct impact factors? What do they really mean, and how important are these impact factors?
Okay, simple. Impact factor is simply a ratio. Now, what is a ratio? It's a ratio of the number of articles or number of citable items. So it may be articles, it may be review articles, it may be letters to the editor, that a journal published in a given year, to how often any of those was cited by other journals or including the same journal. So essentially, it's a ratio of how many articles the journal has published and how many times those articles have been cited. Now, what you need to remember here is, first, the impact factor is not constant. Impact factor is given every year. So the impact factor of a journal may be, let's say, whatever X value. It may change, it may increase, it may decrease. That is the first thing. Second thing you need to remember is multidisciplinary journals typically will have higher impact factors for the simple reason that because they publish papers on a variety of topics, naturally the chances that those papers are going to be cited are much more. Now, whether impact factor is important or not, I would say it is important if your superiors, your appraisals, the scientific community at large considers them important. And I would say yes, at this stage, it is a simple measure of assessing the worth of your paper. I would personally say this is not the best way to assess the scientist, the worth of science, but unfortunately, this is a handy measure, and that is what administrators are likely to use. So yes, impact factor is important, but make it is a legitimate impact factor. As someone of you asked, don't take the journal's website at its face value. Dig around a bit and make sure that it has a legitimate impact factor.
Sure. One penultimate question before the final question. Sometimes if the word limit crosses because of the content that the person is writing, how do you solve that problem? Because many of the journals have got a strict word limit of, for example, XYZ words while writing a review. How do you deal with these situations?
Oh, okay. Of course, it depends on by how much you are exceeding the margin. Let's say that the journal says that a full-length research paper should be about not more than 6,000 words, and your version is going say 6,500 words. Then I would say by focusing on editing, it should be possible to manage that word limit. But if you are way beyond the word limit, then I would say another option is you see whether you can split your paper into 2 parts and then submit, or while submitting to the editor, indicate to the editor that this is a lengthy contribution, but I would suggest that this could be divided in part 1 and part 2. Of course, you will need to see how you structure it. But as I said, if your word count is far too, it exceeds the limit by a very wide margin, then I would say this is an option. Because then trimming or editing is not an option. You would see whether the journal would be willing to publish it in parts. That is one way to handle that.
Sure. So I'm calling this as a last question, but certainly for just this section, because we have an overwhelming response and there are burning questions that we can cover in the question and answers round after Sunaina's section. Yeah. So the final question goes as, should we include an abbreviation section if we are writing many abbreviations in the paper?
Well, if you are using abbreviations that are standard in your field, then there is really no reason why you should have a separate list of abbreviations. But if you have abbreviations that you have made up for sake of your paper because of the contents of your paper, then it might help. But again, I would say the simple thing is look at the target journal, because many journals I have seen, especially in engineering, they have this section that abbreviations. So irrespective of that, they will include a section on abbreviations. So if your target journal has a separate section on abbreviations, then of course, by all means, you should do that. But otherwise, I would say if you are using standard abbreviations, there is really no reason why you should append a separate list of abbreviations.
That's very, very helpful. So with that, we'll end our first session. Thank you so much, Mr. Yatendra. This was a really insightful.
Well, thank you so much for asking.
Yeah, this was a really insightful presentation and the discussion, and I'm sure all our attendees would have benefited from this. We will quickly take a 5 minutes short break and we'll reconvene at 11:25, and then we'll start with the second main session, which will be taken by Dr. Sunaina about research ethics, and we'll ask Mr. Yatendra to also join us for the question and answers round. So I request all of you to not to disconnect the platform. You can take a short break and we'll reconvene at 11:25. Thank you.